There is a moment in awakening that almost no one prepares you for. It is not the peace, it is not the expansion, it is not the elevated awareness. It is the strange silence that begins forming. A silence between you and the people who have always been around you. You didn't fight, you didn't argue, you didn't make a dramatic announcement, but something shifted, and you feel it. Maybe it started small, a conversation that didn't flow like it used to, a joke that no longer felt funny, a topic that once excited you now feels shallow. Slowly, you begin noticing an invisible distance, not physical, energetic. You are still in the same places, but you are no longer in the same frequency. And that brings a quiet question few admit. Why does it feel like I'm losing people right when I'm finding myself? This is the paradox of awakening. As you move closer to yourself, some begin moving away from you, and this is not accidental. Because relationships are not sustained by affection alone. They are sustained by shared levels of consciousness. Before, you connected through shared patterns, shared fears, shared distractions, shared unconscious narratives. But now, you see the patterns. You notice repetition, cyclic complaints, judgment-based conversations, approval dynamics, social masks. And the most unsettling part, you can't unsee it. You try to participate, you try to laugh, you try to blend in, but something inside you observes everything, with a new clarity. And clarity creates discomfort, not because you feel superior, but because you feel different. And feeling different can be deeply lonely. Maybe you've started enjoying solitude more. Not out of sadness, but because silence feels more honest than certain interactions. Maybe you realized some friendships were sustained only by distraction, or that certain bonds depended on the older version of you, the one who needed to please, agree, compete, or explain. And when you stop doing that, the balance shifts. Some people don't know how to relate to you anymore, and something subtle happens. Fewer invitations, fewer messages, less depth, less connection, and you wonder, am I isolating? Or evolving? This doubt is common, because our brain associates belonging with safety. Since childhood, we've learned that being accepted means survival, being included means protection. So when you begin feeling out of sync, your nervous system reacts, it interprets it as threat. But maybe this isn't exclusion, maybe it's transition, because when awareness expands, you begin seeking something different, not validation, but truth, not intensity, but authenticity, not quantity, but depth. And that completely transforms how you relate. You no longer tolerate draining conversations. You no longer accept manipulative dynamics. You no longer feel the need to prove yourself. And this can unsettle those still operating within those structures. Not because you are wrong, but because you stepped out of the invisible game. And when someone exits the game, those still playing feel the difference. Sometimes unconsciously, people distance themselves because your presence begins reflecting something back to them. Your calm exposes their anxiety. Your silence reveals their internal noise. Your awareness illuminates shadows they are not ready to face, and not everyone is ready for that. Awakening does not violently destroy relationships. It reveals which bonds were built on shared unconsciousness. And that can be painful, because you didn't want to lose anyone. You just wanted to be more real. But here is something profound. When you awaken, you stop shrinking to fit. And that alters the social architecture around you. Some connections deepen, others dissolve. Not out of conflict, not out of hatred, but out of misalignment. And often this happens quietly. No explanation, no closure, no drama, just a gradual feeling that you are no longer walking the same path. And maybe you are feeling that now. Maybe you sense your circle shifting, your conversations changing, your identity evolving. And the most important question is not, why are people drifting away? But, who have I become that no longer fits the old patterns? In the next block, we'll go even deeper. We'll explore what happens in the brain when perception shifts, why the nervous system reacts to belonging changes, and why this stage is not a mistake in the journey. It is an inevitable step in conscious maturity. But before we continue, reflect honestly. Are you losing people, or are you finally stopping losing yourself in them? There is a reason this hurts. Even when you understand you are changing, even when you know you are evolving, even when you don't want to go back to who you were, it still hurts, because awakening does not only shift your perception of reality, it shifts your social identity. For years, maybe decades, you built relationships based on an older version of yourself, the version that needed acceptance, needed validation, needed belonging. That version formed invisible agreements, silent contracts. You never spoke about them, but they were there. I'll keep being this person, and you'll keep accepting me. When you awaken, you break that agreement, not aggressively, not intentionally, but inevitably, because you start moving differently. You react differently. You respond differently. You position yourself differently. You stay silent where you once argued. You observe where you once engaged, and that destabilizes the system around you. Many relationships operate as unconscious balance systems. Each person holds a role: the complainer, the advisor, the dramatizer, the peacemaker, the validator, the attention seeker, the rescuer. When you awaken, you step out of the role, and when one element leaves the role, the entire system destabilizes. Some people will try to pull you back, subtly, with phrases like, "You've changed, you're acting strange, you seem distant, you're not the same," and maybe, for the first time, you respond, "I'm not." But that creates discomfort, because when someone shifts consciousness, they stop reinforcing old patterns. And many relationships were sustained by pattern reinforcement. You used to complain together, agree together, feed narratives together. Now you observe, and observation is disarming. Conscious presence dismantles invisible games, and not everyone feels safe around that. There is also something even deeper happening. When you awaken, your emotional energy reorganizes. You stop seeking connection from need. You begin seeking connection from authenticity, and that completely changes the type of bond you tolerate. Before, intensity felt like connection. Now, coherence feels like connection. Before, drama felt like closeness. Now, silence feels like closeness. Before, being needed felt like love. Now, freedom feels like love. This inner shift creates natural misalignment, not because you reject people, but clarity. And clarity disrupts old structures. There is also a neurological explanation. When you go through awakening, spiritual, psychological, existential, your brain begins reorganizing neural networks. Your interpretation of social stimuli shifts. Situations that once triggered pleasure now trigger fatigue. Conversations that once released dopamine now feel superficial. Your nervous system begins prioritizing internal coherence over external stimulation. Your perceptual filters change. And when filters change, your social experience changes. But here is the crucial point. This does not mean you are better than anyone. It simply means you are at a different stage of perception. And that is natural. The difficulty arises when you try to maintain relationships at the old frequency, because you feel the misalignment, they feel the misalignment, and no one names it. So connection becomes fragile, less frequent, less deep, and you begin feeling a new kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of no longer being understood the same way. That can generate fear. What if I end up alone? What if I lose everyone? What if awakening costs me everything? But maybe that's not the right question. Maybe the question is, what kind of relationships only exist when I am disconnected from myself? Because awakening is not about losing people. It is about losing connection versions that depended on your unconsciousness, and that involves grief. You are not just losing people, you are losing the identity that sustained those bonds. And identity does not dissolve without resistance. In the next block, we will go deeper still. We will explore the invisible grief of awakening, the primitive fear of exclusion, and why this phase is a natural filter for more aligned connections. But before we continue, ask yourself honestly, are you being abandoned? Or are you finally stopping abandoning yourself? There is a kind of grief that has no ritual, no formal goodbye, no clear explanation, no dramatic ending. Yet it happens. It is the grief of shared identity dissolving. When you awaken, you do not only lose people, you lose the version of yourself that existed with those people. And that hurts in a subtle but profound way. It is not sharp pain, it is diffuse. A slow dissolving of something once familiar. You may still talk to them. You may still see them. You may still care, but the resonance is different, and you feel it in small details. The longer silences, the forced conversations, the feeling of being out of place while physically present. This activates something ancient in the human system, the primal fear of exclusion. In early human history, being excluded meant death. No food, no protection, no survival alone. That code still lives in your nervous system. So when you feel psychologically misaligned, your body reacts. Even if rationally you know you are evolving, biologically your system interprets it as threat. This creates inner conflict. One part of you says, I can't pretend anymore. Another part whispers, but what if I end up alone? This tension can generate guilt. Guilt for changing, guilt for not fitting, guilt for wanting silence, guilt for desiring depth, guilt for desiring depth, guilt for no longer enjoying the same dynamics. But awakening is not about moving away from people. It is about moving closer to yourself. And when you move closer to yourself, you realize how many relationships were sustained by adaptation. You adapted to moods, adapted to opinions, adapted to roles, adapted to maintain harmony. Constant adaptation creates internal disconnection. Awakening breaks that disconnection. It makes you aware of how much you are shrinking to maintain bonds. And when you stop shrinking, some bonds no longer know how to exist. That does not mean they were fake. It means they were compatible with your previous configuration. Imagine your consciousness as a specific frequency. You attracted people vibrating at that level. When your frequency shifts, resonance shifts. Some can evolve with you, others cannot. No one is wrong. It is resonance, but the mind interprets it as loss. And loss activates grief. Even if you haven't physically lost anyone, you have lost the old structure of belonging. That creates emptiness. Emptiness is one of the most challenging experiences of awakening, because emptiness offers no distraction, no identity, no validation. It offers silence. And in silence, you meet parts of yourself that were once drowned out by social noise. You begin realizing many conversations were avoidance. Many gatherings were distraction. Many shared laughs were compensation. And that realization can be unsettling. You may ask, was I truly connected, or just distracted? That question hurts, but it liberates. Awakening does not destroy healthy bonds. It reveals where emotional dependence was disguised as connection, and that realization requires maturity, because it means acknowledging that some relationships were sustained by need. Need for validation, need for company, need to avoid being alone, need to confirm identity. When you begin feeling internally sufficient, that need decreases. When need decreases, dynamic changes. You react less. You require less. You cling less. That may look like coldness, but it is emotional autonomy. There is also a neurobiological shift occurring. Your brain strengthens circuits related to self-regulation. Security begins forming internally rather than externally. Reduced social dependence can feel like isolation at first, because your brain is recalibrating what connection truly means. During this recalibration, you may feel lonely, but perhaps that loneliness is simply the space between two versions of you, the old one that needed the group to exist, and the new one that begins existing independently. This transition is delicate. Many mistake it for error, but it is emerging maturity. Awakening feels lonely only during transition. Once your new identity stabilizes, aligned connections begin appearing, not from need, but from coherence, not from fear, but from resonance, not from dependency, but from conscious choice. But to reach that, you must cross the void, and the void requires courage. So maybe the deeper question is not, why are people leaving, but, am I willing to move through this stage without shrinking myself again? In the next block, we will explore how to navigate this phase with an open heart, how not to become hardened, how not to develop superiority, how to allow new connections without fear. But before we continue, feel this honestly. If everyone came back today, but you had to become who you used to be, would you accept? There is a silent trap in the middle of awakening that few recognize. It is not returning to old patterns. It is not reconnecting with misaligned people. It is something subtler, turning awareness into defense. When you begin seeing patterns clearly, when manipulation becomes obvious, when emotional games are exposed, you gain lucidity. But along with lucidity can come something dangerous: closure. The heart, trying to protect itself from the pain of drifting apart, builds layers. You become more observant, more reserved, more selective, and that is healthy to a point. But there is an invisible line between maturity and rigidity, and many awakened individuals cross it unknowingly, because the discomfort of misalignment can be intense. So the inner system decides, better not feel too much, and slowly you confuse awareness with emotional distance, detachment with coldness, boundaries with indifference, autonomy with isolation. But true awakening does not harden, it softens, it deepens sensitivity, expands empathy, strengthens compassion. What changes is not love, it is pattern. You stop loving from need, and begin loving from choice. But this requires something rare: keeping your heart open while holding clear boundaries. And that is one of the highest forms of conscious maturity. Because closing is easier. Closing protects, closing prevents disappointment. Closing avoids pain, but closing also blocks aligned connection. There is a massive difference between, I don't need anyone, and I consciously choose who enters. The first is defense. The second is awareness. You are not here to become unreachable. You are here to become integrated. Integrity is not coldness. It is alignment between what you feel, what you think, and what you allow. Awakening means you stop allowing dynamics that violate your energy, but it does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop abandoning yourself. There is also another subtle danger: spiritual ego, the feeling of being above. seeing more, being on a different level. This is compensation. When the system feels exclusion, it can convert it into superiority. They don't get it. They're still asleep. I've moved beyond that. True awareness does not compare. It understands. Everyone is exactly where they need to be. You did not awaken because you are better. You awakened because you are ready. And readiness is responsibility, not privilege. There is humility in real awakening. You see patterns. Without despising those living them, you recognize games. Without judging those playing them, you simply choose not to participate. That is discernment, not rejection. And discernment is maturity. Another essential truth. Not every drifting must become rupture. Some relationships simply shift position. An intimate friend may become occasional, a constant presence may become distant, and that is natural. Relationships are not eternal contracts. They are consciousness intersections. Some are seasonal, some transitional, some lifelong, but you only see that when you stop forcing permanence. Forcing permanence is fear. Allowing flow is maturity. If you try to keep everyone from your previous phase, you will exhaust yourself. If you cut everyone abruptly, you may create trauma. The balance is allowing life to reorganize naturally. And that requires trust. Trust that you are not losing, you are recalibrating. Trust that you are not alone, you are stabilizing. Trust that you are not wrong, you are maturing. One more crucial point. Do not use awakening as an excuse to avoid vulnerability. After feeling misunderstood, the tendency is to stop opening up. New connections require exposure. They require risk. They require authenticity. You don't need to explain yourself to everyone, but you must remain emotionally available. So perhaps the deeper question is, do you want protection, or do you want growth? Because growth always includes vulnerability. In the next block we will go deeper into conscious social reconstruction without fear, without rushing, without dependency. But before we continue, feel this honestly. Are you building boundaries out of self-respect or building walls out of fear? After learning not to close your heart, after understanding that boundaries are not walls, an inevitable question arises. How do I rebuild my social world without repeating the past? Here is a silent truth. If you are not conscious in reconstruction, you recreate the same pattern with new faces. Different person, same dynamic, different context, same script. Conscious social reconstruction begins before anyone new appears. It begins internally. It begins when you understand that connection is not necessity, it is choice. Most human relationships are born from unconscious lack. Lack of validation, lack of belonging, lack of being seen, lack of being confirmed. When two lacks meet, they create intensity. But intensity is not alignment, it is fusion of unmet needs. Conscious relationships emerge from sufficiency. You are not seeking someone to complete you, you are available to share. That difference changes everything. When you are not trying to be chosen, you begin choosing. And conscious choice requires internal clarity, not superficial criteria, not status, not matching hobbies. Energetic criteria. How do you feel after interacting with this person? Expanded or contracted? Light or drained? Clear or confused? Calm or anxious? The body responds before the rational mind. But to hear the body, you must be present. And presence is the most powerful filter there is. Conscious reconstruction is not about searching for evolved people. It is about becoming stable enough to recognize coherence. When you stabilize internally, your field changes, and fields reorganize encounters. You begin attracting different conversations, different themes, different depth, comfortable silence, and perhaps something you never experienced before. People who do not want to fix you, not compete, not absorb, not control. People who simply walk beside you. But here is something rarely discussed. Conscious relationships are not perfect. They still have conflict. The difference is that conflict becomes growth, not attack, not manipulation, not dramatic withdrawal, dialogue, because two mature consciousnesses do not fight to win, they converse to understand. Conscious reconstruction also requires something difficult, patience. When you stop accepting any connection just to avoid loneliness, there may be a transition period, a space where few truly resonate. This period is crucial. It proves to you that you prefer quality over quantity, coherence over popularity, truth over distraction. And the longer you sustain that, the rarer you become. Not elitist, rare, vibrationally rare. Coherence is rare, integrity is rare, presence is rare, and rarity attracts rarity. You do not need to convince anyone you changed. You simply live differently. Those who recognize it will approach naturally. Another crucial truth. Conscious reconstruction does not mean abandoning all previous circles. It means repositioning yourself within them. Maybe you still interact with some people, but without dissolving, without shrinking, without hiding depth. And something interesting happens. Some drift away, others grow beside you. Presence inspires without forcing. Another deep layer: do not turn reconstruction into a mission. Do not try to awaken others. Do not try to save anyone. That is repetition of old need-based patterns. Conscious reconstruction is silent. You live. You integrate. You embody coherence. Those ready, feel it. Feel it. Maybe you are between worlds right now, between who you were and who you are becoming. That space may feel empty, but it is fertile. It is where aligned relationships germinate, but they require time. And time requires trust. Trust you are not being forgotten, you are being refined. Trust you are not losing people, you are losing incompatibility. Trust you are not isolated, you are being prepared. And here is the defining question: are you willing to wait for aligned connections, or will you run back to what feels familiar? The familiar may feel safe, but safe may keep you small. Conscious social reconstruction is courage. You choose not to repeat. You choose not to shrink. You choose not to negotiate your integrity. And when you do, life responds. In the next block, we will explore how to trust this process, without anxiety, without control, without rushing. But before continuing, feel honestly, are you ready to live relationships that require your most integrated self? There is a very delicate phase after conscious reconstruction, a phase where you are no longer who you were, but not yet fully integrated into the new, an invisible interval, often mistaken for loneliness. But it is not loneliness, it is recalibration. When you shift internally, the external field needs time to reorganize. And time is something the mind resists. The mind wants guarantees, predictability, immediate proof that everything is working. But spiritual maturity requires tolerating the space between phases. That space can feel too quiet. It can feel like nothing is happening. It can feel like you lost more than you gained. But something profound is occurring. You are stabilizing. And stability is not exciting, not dramatic, not intense. It is silent. Like roots growing before the tree appears. Many sabotage this stage. They mistake lack of stimulation for lack of progress, and return to old connections, not from alignment, but from discomfort with emptiness. Here is something essential. If you do not learn to inhabit the space between relationships, you will never build mature ones. Because maturity requires autonomy, and autonomy is born from the ability to be well alone. Being alone does not mean isolation. It means not depending on constant presence to validate your existence. There is a massive difference between feeling lonely and being in conscious solitude. In unconscious loneliness, you feel rejected, forgotten, disconnected. In conscious solitude, you feel whole, present, calm. This phase consolidates identity. You realize your stability does not depend on who stands beside you. It depends on internal coherence. The more coherent you become, the less anxious you feel about who will appear. There is something important about synchronicity. Aligned connections rarely arrive explosively. They emerge naturally, without spectacle, without drama, without grand promises, a casual conversation, an ordinary encounter, a silent recognition. But you feel it, not through intensity, through calm. Synchronicity is not theatrical magic. It is invisible alignment. And alignment requires preparation. If a deeply aligned connection entered your life today, would you be stable enough to sustain it? Or would you project insecurity, create dependency, rush the rhythm? Timing is not delay, it is maturity. Sometimes life is not postponing your connections, it is protecting you from entering them prematurely. And that requires trust. Trust that coherence remains. Trust that incompatibility dissolves naturally. Trust that you do not need to force meetings, only sustain integrity. There is something subtle. When you stop searching desperately, you become noticeable. Desperation creates noise. Presence creates magnetism. Conscious reconstruction is not intense action, it is consistent alignment. Alignment creates field. Field creates encounters. But the field must be clean, free from fear, free from lack, free from urgency. This stage is perhaps the most challenging, because it requires patience. And patience is not passivity. It is active trust. Waking up each day knowing you do not need to chase connection, but you also do not need to avoid it. You are available, not needy, open, not anxious, whole, still expanding. That combination creates something rare, vibrational stability. And vibrational stability attracts the same. Maybe you are in this space right now. Maybe you are wondering, how long will this last? But perhaps the deeper question is, what is this phase teaching me about myself? Every in-between phase refines you. You are learning to hold your center, learning to trust perception, learning not to negotiate energy for company, and that changes everything. In the next block we will integrate it all. We will transform this process into clear direction, but before moving forward, feel this deeply. If you made it this far, it was not by accident. Something inside you needed to hear this. Maybe you were not just watching, maybe you were recognizing yourself. This video was never just about people drifting away. It was about identity reorganizing. It was about emotional maturity emerging, breaking unconscious relational patterns that once felt normal, but no longer feel aligned. That is far deeper than it appears on the surface. When relationships change after awakening, it is not the world rejecting you, it is your awareness expanding. And expansion always alters compatibility. Compatibility is not love. Compatibility is frequency. And frequency shifts when you shift. For years you built bonds based on older versions of yourself, versions that needed approval, validation, belonging, needed to be chosen, needed to feel safe through acceptance. There is no shame in that. We all begin by seeking belonging, but superficial belonging begins to feel heavy. You realize you are accepted, but not truly seen, included, but not understood, surrounded, but not connected in depth. That creates silent tension inside, a subtle misalignment, a quiet inner discomfort. It cannot be explained logically, but can be felt clearly. That tension is relational awakening. You begin to see that being surrounded is not the same as being connected, that talking is not the same as sharing, that attention is not the same as presence. Once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Then the micro-distancing begins. You speak less, you explain less, you adapt less, you perform less. You stop shrinking yourself to maintain harmony. You stop overextending to preserve comfort. Eventually you simply stop sustaining dynamics that require you to betray yourself. Others may interpret that as coldness, but it is not coldness. It is awareness. It is integrity, stabilizing. It is your nervous system no longer tolerating incoherence. You may have felt guilty. You may have wondered if you were becoming distant, difficult, different. But here is something very few people understand. When you stop abandoning yourself to maintain connection, connections that depended on your self-abandonment begin to dissolve. Not because you became selfish, but because you became whole, and people who were familiar with your fragmented version may not immediately recognize your integrated one. That realization hurts, because it reveals that some bonds were built on who you used to be. But it is also liberating, because you no longer need to perform, you no longer need to convince, you no longer need to justify your growth. You simply changed. And silent change is the most powerful form of transformation, because it shows in boundaries, in pauses, in standards, in what you no longer tolerate. Perhaps the most destabilizing part of this phase is not losing people, it is losing identity. Who are you without that role, without that group, without that dynamic, without that version of yourself? That is the real transition, and it requires courage. Courage to tolerate temporary emptiness. Courage to sit in the space between old and new. Courage not to run back to familiarity just to avoid discomfort. Because in that silent in-between, something begins forming. A new relational posture, a new emotional standard, a new internal stability. You begin realizing you no longer want intensity without depth, proximity without presence, attention without truth. You want coherence, and coherence is rare, because coherence requires maturity. It requires emotional responsibility. It requires awareness of your own patterns. It requires the ability to sit with yourself without seeking immediate distraction. And when you become coherent, you begin attracting coherence. But before that manifests externally, it stabilizes internally. This is the phase where many people panic, because it feels like nothing is happening. The circle is smaller, the noise is quieter, the stimulation is reduced. But in truth, everything is happening. Identity consolidates, boundaries solidify, self-respect strengthens. Calm begins replacing urgency, and calm is power. Maybe you are there right now, between versions, between circles, between definitions. That is not delay, it is refinement, not abandonment, alignment. And once you truly accept that, a different kind of peace begins to emerge. Not the peace of isolation, not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of coherence. The peace of not needing to explain yourself constantly. The peace of not negotiating your energy. The peace of knowing that even if your circle becomes smaller, your integrity became stronger. And this is where the next phase begins. Because after distancing, comes silence. After reorganization, comes stabilization. After apparent loss, comes clarity. In the next video, we will explore something even deeper. The calm that appears when the mind becomes quiet. Because once the external noise reduces, you begin to notice something extraordinary. The stillness that was always there, the clarity that does not depend on approval, the stability that does not require constant reassurance. That strange peace is not emptiness, it is alignment. And understanding it changes everything. If this resonated with you, share this video with someone who may be going through this transition. Sometimes one reflection can dissolve years of confusion. And before you leave, write one word in the comments that represents where you are right now. One word that defines your phase. Clarity, transition, courage, stability, reorganization, integration. When you write it, you claim it. When you name it, you anchor it. Continue this journey, not as someone who was left behind, but as someone who stopped leaving themselves. The next video is already waiting for you. Gratitude for being here. Much light on your path.